When Jesus asked, "Who do you say I am?" Well, he wasn't standing in Jerusalem. He was standing at the very gates of pagan worship, a place known as the gates of Hades. Now, Caesarea Philippi was home to the worship of the god Pan, the half-goat god of nature and fertility, and his cave was called the Gates of Hades. It was filled with sacrifices to the underworld. So the message from Jesus was clear. He understood, in fact, the powers of paganism, fear, and death. Now, Caesarea Philippi was in the far north, outside of Israel's historic covenant land. It was famous for the cave dedicated to the god Pan, and it was called the Gates of Hades. And Jesus deliberately took his disciples there, away from crowds and priests. And why? In order to privately teach them a most important lesson regarding the kingdom of God. So, standing on a rocky spur, surrounded by cliffs and shrines carved into the rock, he asked them a most important question. So let's read the account at Matthew chapter 16, starting at verse 13. When Jesus came to the region of Caesarea Philippi, he questioned his disciples, "Who do people say the Son of Man is?" They replied, "Some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and still others Jeremiah or one of the prophets." "But what about you?" Jesus asked. "Who do you say I am?" And Simon Peter answered, "Well, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God." Jesus replied, "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for this was not revealed to you by flesh and blood, but by my Father in heaven. And I tell you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not prevail against it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you bind on the earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on the earth will be loosed in heaven." And then he admonished his disciples not to tell anyone that he was the Christ. So, was Jesus privately teaching these close disciples of his? What was he teaching them? And keep in mind that these disciples would have included who? Judas Iscariot. Is that important? Well, we'll consider that later in another episode. However, for the moment, let's keep a couple of things in mind. And let's not lose anything in the translation process. See, in verse 18, Jesus uses two forms of a Greek noun that are used. The first is Petros, which is the Greek translation for Peter, and is in the masculine form. And the meaning of this word refers to, well, a detached stone or boulder, such as a stone a man may throw. And you can check this out in Strong's Concordance. The number is 4074. The second is Petra, Petra, which is a translation for church, and is in the feminine form, which refers to a mass of connected rock, such as a cliff. And the Strong's number is 4073. And you can check this out again at BibleHub.com, Greek 4073 or 4074. So in verse 18, Jesus is referring to two different nouns. You are Peter, Petros, Petros, which is the masculine form, meaning a detached stone. Then he says, upon this rock, Petra, Petra, I will build my church, which is a translation of a mass of connected rock, upon which he will build, referring to the church. And it is in the feminine form. Now, remember, Jesus would have spoken to his disciples in Hebrew or Aramaic. What we are reading are Jesus' words, but they are the Greek translation from Hebrew or Aramaic. So we have to be careful, as meanings can and do often get lost in the translation process and lead to really quite different understandings. Jesus goes on in verse 18. He says, on this rock I will build my church. So was Jesus referring to Peter, Petros, a detached stone on which he was going to build his church? Or was he referring to a mass of connected rock, Petra, Petra, like the cliff face they were standing on? But before we try to figure that one out, here is another point that will impact on our understanding. See, Jesus was going to build his church on Petros. However, he was actually quoting from a passage in the book of Isaiah, chapter 56 and verse 7, which reads, I will bring them to my holy mountain and make them joyful in my house of prayer. For my house will be called a house of prayer for all the nations. So, although the Greek translation, which we are reading from, calls the build a church, Jesus, speaking to his disciples in Hebrew or Aramaic, calls the build a house of prayer. And why? Because he was quoting from the Hebrew scriptures, Isaiah 56 verse 7. So this foundation now laid, right, we are better equipped, if you like, to understand what Jesus was actually teaching his disciples. Because 6 days later, Jesus led Peter, James, and John up a mountain, Mount Hermon. And here his true glory was revealed in what we know as the Transfiguration. The message? The kingdom of God would not be founded on temples of stone, but on the living Son of God. So this place was chosen for a reason, and the setting tells the story. And what follows, the Transfiguration, makes it even clearer. So let's look at the full picture in the next video due on Thursday. So if you found this information helpful, then please, once again, I invite you to like, to subscribe and share, and that we see you next time. So thank you very much.